বাইগুন দেখছো? দেখুন না কেন, বাইগুনের পেছন দিকটা বোটার দিকটা কাইটা, তারপরে রাত্রিবেলা ঘরে দেওয়ালের সঙ্গে লাগা, বোটাটারে একবার নিচে নামাও, ঘর আলোয় আলোময়, বোটাটারে তোলো, আবার সে হলো। For those of you who couldn't get it, it precisely says it was seen an eggplant to this lady. Yes. So cut the side of where the duck is and press it on the wall, bring it down. The room is filled with light. Flick it up, it's dark again. Now, such is the cruelty of history that within 10 years, this lady would find herself jostling in a shanty on the side of Manitora, immersed in the same darkness. But as it so happened that for livelihood, she got a job near Babu's house, where among the various chores was what is called dusting and cleaning. The Bangla is never used. Dusting and cleaning involved cleaning the switches. So I deliberately said this because to me it has a metonymic value. And as one of the scholars Dipesh mentions, Michael Warner says that this flicking of the switch to find everything, to find, electricity, the supply of electricity has become part of our unconscious, modern unconscious. It's metonymic because this transition tells a lot of things. It tells how human being produced the technosphere, and it tells how the technosphere now leads the human being. As a result, human beings have now two existences, I relating to you. The other is the human thing, part of the geobiological space, okay? And the mentor of today's Anthropocene. Okay, perhaps poets always see things early. How are you? Here is Rainer Maria Rilke, 1922. I'm quoting from a sonnet of his. Many of you have read it. Orpheus. Okay. And Rilke had just emerged from a very deep depression. And previously, he wrote 10 poems in 12 years. So it goes like that which is used up, as to the nature's abundant dump and mute supply, the unsayable sounds, joyfully add yourself, and the result will follow. Now let's begin with the example of the pin, or better, the history of the manufacture of the pin. In this story can be read in metonymic form the history of shift from artisan production to the arrival of modern industry. There is no novelty in suggesting that modern large industry did not come into being overnight. However, we always do not realize how difficult, how complex, how contingent this process was, and how long. For the industry of the Middle Ages or home artisan industry to transform into modern large factories with machine power took no less than good 200 years or more. From the middle of the 16th century well until the end of 18th century. Okay? This nearly 250 years marked a complicated passage of history. of complex mutations of earlier artisan forms. Um, okay. Of large assembly of workers, usually under one single shade, the large-scale displacement of people from the villages to industrial townships, the primitive accumulation, as it is called, the disrobing of their means of production and traditional rights, the difficult acquiring in course of time the mantle of a new set of rights, and intricate division of labor in keeping with the technology of the day, a transition from successiveness to simultaneity, a strict rationalization of labor time, and ever more efficient machine fueled by energy, initially water energy and then steam energy, and oil will come much later. The slow replacing of sheer human labor by machine energy, all this together was an awfully complicated passage of history. And it all happened under the vigil of fact. Be it of the human baby or a historical era, birth, as Foucault once commented, is always blood. I deliberately use the expression disrobing of traditional rights and putting on the mantle of new rights to mean two simultaneous processes. Workers struggle for rights, and alongside this, with the consolidation of liberal techniques, the ruling class's use of rights to co-opt the workers into the new order of rule, the liberal capitalist. Now let's get back to the example of the manufacture of pins with which I started. Suppose I am in the pin making business. I could provide step-by-step instructions for my pin maker to make pins. How many steps, how many pins could one individual produce in a day? Maybe 10, maybe 15. In contrast, allow me to draw from Adam Smith's famous description of pin making as carried out in his time. That is the 18th century. One man, I'm quoting from him, one man draws out the web, he says, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it at one end, and a fifth works on the head, and so on. Smith identifies about 18 distinct operations, each of which is designated to separate clusters of workers. As the factory started increasing in size and with more use of machinery, more workers could be employed to do the same distinct operation to increase exponentially the number of pins produced at the end of the day, and all the different operations would form a tightly knit grid. With division of labor comes the issue of socially necessary labor time. If, for instance, the pin cutter can cut an average of 1,000 pins an hour, the worker who puts the heads on the pins can only finish 200, let's say, in the same time, then two pin cutters could keep 10 head fixers busy all the time. Okay. Thus, the rationalization of labor time becomes a technical necessity. In the early stages of manufacture, the principal apparatus remained the body of the detailed work. And Dipesh has a lot to say between the difference of work and labor. Remember, Dipesh, your long section. Once manufacture started getting mechanized, investment in machine tools of higher efficiency became necessary to remain in competition. And the more the machines and the larger they are, the more the requirement of energy. Here I come to it. To give you an instance, from 1700 to 1750, production of coal increased by 50% in Britain, the first country to use coal on a large scale, and nearly another 100% by 1800. During the later years, as steam power really took a firm grip, this rate of increase soared to 500% by 1850. At 1900, this production reached 236 million short tons, which is the measure for coal, that is 908 kilograms to one short ton, which compared to 1750 is an increase of nearly 1000%. But then colonial extractive economy had started full swing, meaning also that the carbon particles that clouded the industrial towns of England would contain substantial components of Bengal's Raniganj, Asansol. The process continued and intensified, but for the real drama to begin, we had to wait till the end of the Second World War, when to revamp sagging demand, the European states started investing heavily in public utilities and essential industries. This is the phase of manufacture, which is now called the Great Acceleration. Starting in the early 1950s, it has been going on unabated, first under the tutelage of welfare state that promised 100% employment, and then towards 1980s, of neoliberalism, with its apostles emphasizing like never before that rationally endowed citizen consumers engaged in profit maximization. Give me a moment, please. Yeah. Engaged in profit maximization is the surest and shortest route to general prosperity. Apart from replacing the welfare states, this also means accentuating capitalism's basic propensity of knitting people and goods in a global techno-commercial network. This will come to be known as globalization, causing fossil fuel emissions at an unprecedented level and thus anthropogenic global warming. The arrival of cyber technology in the late 1990s attributed to the compression of space and time a bewildering level of efficiency, changing the very texture of life and forms of living. Here, two things need to be remembered. First, welfarism did not mean an ethical turn of the Western state. It was a particular capitalist policy to come out of crisis. Second, capital does not relate only to commerce. It is primarily a social relationship, one that was instrumental in gradually writing the social in the light of economic logic. Today, we are all citizen consumers. A student in a university is a client, and the university is the supplier of services, indicating a massive ethical overhaul. The history of modernity, state, and capital is a humanocentric narrative. And I must tell you, from now on, I will be closely following the patient's students. I am by no means an expert in this area. Honestly, I first came across the patient's book, Climate of History, in April last year. And after that, I have been reading as much as I can, given the many kind of other engagements that involves working in a university. So basically, what I'm saying, it's an attempt to, put before you whether my understanding has been going on right lines, and I'm very happy that you were now also part of it. And I intend to give another paper next year, early next year, on the philosophical contestations. Because with the entry of humanities in this area in Anthropocene, now it is a very richly thought out philosophical. The history of modernity, state, and capital is a humanocentric narrative, the history of humans in their immediate doings and relationships. If the flora and fauna and the moving part of the planet come into the picture, and the non-living part of the planet come into the picture, it is only in relation to human activities. Wittgenstein once remarked, when I see a house, one of the questions that comes to mind first, how old is the house? But we never ask a similar question about the surrounding objects. The nature surrounding us is a grand inert backdrop taken for granted. Left out from agentic consideration is the far vaster terrain of histories of geobiology and climate, histories that record not the triumphal story of humans, their domination over the entire planet, but the extent of devastations that this very success has caused to the planetary health. A success that now manifests in the form of alarming levels of air pollution, recurrence of extreme weather conditions, rising levels of the sea, salinization of coastal soil, freshwater shortage, the ever-renewed threat of pandemics, potential or realized, and the loss of biodiversity. For instance, it took, cites Chakraborty, something like 375 million years for atmospheric oxygen to stabilize between 17% and 32%. If I remember right, this is what we think. Now, this balance stands at the precarious threshold, thanks mainly to the fossil fuel emissions in the last 70 years or so. Ironically, it is globalization that has brought the domain of the planetary to the radar of human attention. Its root ardent, more visible than others, than ever. Not surprisingly, in the last couple of decades, all the panegyrics about globalization since the 1980s are now giving way to obituaries as we start paying for human flourishing with our lives and accustomed ways of living. Consequently, the literature on planetary health, including climate change, global warming, has witnessed a boom in recent years. Dipesh Chakraborty's recent books, first one surely his magnum opus, whether it agrees to it or not, but I believe. Climate of History in a Planetary Age, 2021. And then came One Planet, Many Worlds, the Climate Paradox, 23, are not simply one more example of this role, but a milestone that will guide social human research for years to come. Together, human beings in their collectivity, now 8 billion, have become the sole geological agent. In other words, parts of the geobiological force. It is our doings, emission of fossil fuel particularly, that will determine the fate of life as such on the planet. The crucial question for Chakraborty is what does this new condition mean to the human conditions? What kind of epistemological transformations do we need to bring about in the way we write our histories, in the conceptual streams through which we understand our predicament as the vastly different temporalities of the planet measured in millions of years, and that of the species in hundreds of thousands of years, demand not only their place, along with the much shorter temporality of human-centric narrative, but with the coming of the Anthropocene and overriding this. To situate the human in a matrix of vastly different temporalities is formidably difficult. For we do not at present have neither the theoretical toolkit nor the aptitude. Regardless, it is essential for understanding the human condition. The question becomes even more complex when we consider that humans on the planet are not one, divided primarily as they are between the global north and the global south, the subject of Chakraborty's latest book, One Planet, Many Worlds, The Climate Paradox. He admits that his previous persuasion, namely post-colonial theory, was ecologically blind, caught as it was with the globe of globalization. The author of Climate of History describes his enterprise as philosophical anthropology, which it certainly is. But more fundamentally, for me, it is a treatise on the philosophy of history. From philosophical anthropology, I'm saying philosophy of history, whose resonances will be felt not only in the study of planetary, including biodiversity, to which our lives are intrinsically linked, but in any serious discourse on the human condition. In the climate paradox, Chakraborty engages with Kosellev, the philosopher's treatment of experience and expectation, how one is inscribed to the other. In Critic and Crisis, Kosellev, as you remember, calls crisis constitutive of the mind. Crisis as at once repudiated, that is a medical secular concept. If you don't root out the germs that have infected your body, the disease will recur, and also unique and final. That means it's an epicentristic concept, being the secular and epicentristic. In other words, human progress in modernity is all about going from crisis to crisis, this was a month. How do we designate today's climate, or better, planetary crisis, when it has been argued by many that the sixth extinction is just a few centuries away, with things going from bad to worse? Is modernity constitutively different now from the time Kosellev was writing his account of crisis as ever been? Maybe Dipesh would like to share his thoughts on this in his comments. Let me give you some idea of the scale of plunder, taking examples from Chakraborty's book. During the past 3 centuries, human population increased tenfold, accompanied, for example, by a growth in cattle population to 1,400 million, now about 1 cow per average family size. Between 1950 and 2015, the human population more than tripled. In a few generations, mankind is exhausting the fossil fuels that were generated over several hundred million years. The release of SO2 into the atmosphere by coal and oil burning is at least 2 times higher than the sum of all natural emissions. More than half of all accessible fresh water is used by mankind. Human activity has increased the species extinction rate by 1,000 to 10,000 folds in tropical rainforests. Well, furthermore, humankind releases many toxic substances into the environment. Thanks to the extractive industry, the portion of planet's weight on its surface and the weight below is seriously altered. And Dipesh hasn't written this, but I think this raises the danger of the planet tilting a bit, with the things. Okay. Sadly, in the world of consumption, there is no yesterday or tomorrow, but a blind, overwhelming pleasure. As we have seen, pandemic-related paranoia only helped to increase consumption. When the rush to normalcy is so overriding, forgetting becomes the mode of living. Who will say today that even less than 2 years back, every time I touched something, it seemed I was exploring. Touching carried a speculative possibility of an imagination of the threats that lie below. Given our state of mind, every touch opened a theater in me. But life was back to business as usual in the first possible sign of the recession of the second spring. All in all, in the geological chronology of Earth history, the planet is on the verge of crossing the thresholds of the Holocene epoch that began around 11 to 12,000 years back and entering a new age, that of Anthropocene, in which humans are the principal determinant of the future of the planet. Capitalism, after denying the fact of global warming for decades, has now sensed a market in the paranoia caused by the prospect of looming sixth extinction, either as a spectacle, that is Hollywood, or as hypothetical solutions. Hence, geoengineers are busy writing prescriptions to save the world, while a new astrology in the name of physics of global warming is predicting dates regarding when the tipping point will happen, a point when glaciers, particularly Himalayan glaciers, will start melting at an alarming pace, flooding, for instance, entire North India. And it is into the prediction game, even as we don't know yet what all elements in the planet system will be involved, at what point of time, and how they will be. Now I come to there are 3-4 short sections I'll now come to. When was the Anthropocene? There is virtually a consensus among scientists working on climate and geologists concerned with planetary changes that human-induced climate change is real. But the idea that we have already entered or about to enter the age of Anthropocene, replacing the Holocene, remains as yet a matter of academic contestation. Neither can the large-scale anthropogenic systems and their impact on the planetary system be denied. We are caught in a cusp. Our historically formed common sense, or let's say forms of life, seems to revolt against the new findings. The non-recognition that humans could one day impact the climate, air, and sea allowed us the pure conscience in the exploitation of nature. Nature is the raw material for us lying there to exploit. Whatever we do, we thought, nature will remain constant because our acts, even in their totality, will always remain minuscule to the vast scales of nature. Or this is what we used to think, that we can threaten the very processes and components, both biotic and abiotic, comes to us as an innocent, even if mind-boggling shock. The Nobel laureate Dutch meteorologist and atmospheric chemist Paul Crutzen in the UN had this to say, quoting, "It seems appropriate to assign the term Anthropocene to the human-dominated geological epoch, supplementing the Holocene, the warm period of the past 10 to 12 millennia." Interestingly, he used the word supplementing and not replacing, which indicates to a past state. This could be a statement of facts coming from a scientist or a collective lack of courage on the part of the intellectual community. If the Anthropocene is to be defined as a new geochronological epoch, which follows the end of the Holocene, stratigraphic markers, that is, geological markers of classification, nomenclature, correlation, and interpretation of stratified rocks must be found to demonstrate the impact of human activity in a range of locations across the planet. In August 2016, the Anthropocene Working Group, AWG, presented its recommendations in favor of the formalization of the Anthropocene to the International Commission on Stratigraphy. With the Holocaust, that is, the sun as the main geological agency, in the course of time came the invention of agriculture as the ice cover started melting. Purists might like to date the Anthropocene from the time of homonym control of fire and beginning of settled agriculture. But effectively, the Anthropocene, as we are witnessing today, began from the time of Industrial Revolution and capitalist takeover of production and distribution. Contingencies mark the path of transition from wood to coal to oil as the main source of energy. For great many, the real leap happened with the great acceleration, that is from the 1950s. As Will Stephen and Windy Broadhead comment, the trajectory of the Anthropocene is the name of the paper, I quote, "Only beyond the 20th century is there clear evidence for fundamental shifts in the state and functioning of the earth system that are beyond the range of variability of the Holocene and driven by human activities." Unquote. I have mentioned that from 1950 to 2015, the world population more than tripled. Each life, in whatever form, is an energy consumer and waste emitter. However, the question of demographic explosion has remained, as Dipesh says, an elephant in the room in academic science. Before we move on to show how drastic has been the changes since 1950s in parameters that affect global warming, climate change, and in general planetary health, let me bring to your notice two other candidates for consideration as the beginning of the Anthropocene. One is easily imaginable, the Industrial Revolution, and in many texts identified as 1784, the year James Watt invented the steam. Not only did the extractive industry come of age, coal mainly, but it brought about a new texture in our relationship with nature. Now became truly a raw material, a source to be used for human flourishing. You can call it the disenchantment of nature. So in this consideration, 1784 is the starting point of the Anthropocene. But there is another candidate about which I was not aware before I read about it, the Columbian Exchange, as termed by Simon Lewis and Lisa Maslin. The human planet, how we created the Anthropocene, is the name of the article that in 2018. The significance of this coinage is it immediately brings into focus the whole history of colonialism into the discourse of the Anthropocene. This includes the worldwide trade networks in plants, animals, and human beings, most notably slavery, and also the spread of disease. The transfer of pathogenic germs to which indigenous population of the Americas did not have sufficient immunity led to massive epidemics alongside the ruin brought by colonial war and enslavement. So much so, humans had to wait for the regrowth of plants following the massive disease in a decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide in the early 17th century, known as the Orbis fire. Mind you, some people think that greenhouse gases are all bad. They are not. Just that the carbon particle has increased, they have become a threat. Otherwise, without greenhouse gases, we will be slowly going into the ice age. The Columbian Exchange extends the horizon of the discourse and acknowledges Anthropocene as a meta-crisis composed of a variety of coalescent indicators. However, any cursory glance at how factors affecting the planet radically changed since the 1950s makes the great acceleration the best temporal indicator for the beginning of the Anthropocene. To cite a few examples outside the known ones like climate change, rate of biodiversity loss, nitrogen cycle, etc., in the last 70 years, the world population has gone up from 2 plus to 8 billion, GDP 11 times, an indicator of carbon and fluorine emission, fresh water use 5 times, urban population is now touching 5 billion. That is the major part of total population. And remember here, each city is an energy machine. Okay? International tourism has gone up 500 times. This is the outcome of a peculiar mix of ancient social capitalism, neoliberal philosophy of individual rational profit maximization, rational individual playing in the marketplace, entrepreneurship, and self-monitoring, disciplined citizenry following the mandate of the marketing and the flourishing of cybertech. I come to the second section, art system science. To understand the workings of the Anthropocene, geobiologists have heuristically conceived of a single self-regulating system called art system science, comprising of physical, chemical, biological, and human components, and the interplay of various spheres of the art system, that is, atmosphere, lithosphere, lithosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and cryosphere. The lithosphere, as you know, is the upper crust of the earth, The pedosphere is the lithosphere made of soil and dirt. The hydrosphere, as you can make out, the ocean, including oceanic beds. The biosphere is that of the species, flora and fauna, and the biosphere is a frozen water part, as in South Sea. ESS, as the acronym goes, as a system supports complex multicellular life. It brings with it the concept of deep history that works on a geobiological timescale and challenges the shadow time of the history that humanist scholars work with. The point to note is that it is an expanding equilibrium, and like all equilibriums, durable yet unstable, whose stability depends on the harmony of the different spheres and its ability to adjust itself within a certain limit. Importantly, it is non-anthropocentric construct. If the globe of globalization, in the globe of globalization, we are moral and political creatures. In the globe of the planetary, we are assigned nothing more than creaturely lives like that of or a lizard, elapsing to be as a lizard. Though the humanity falls within the calculus of ESS, it allows no mutuality. Looking at the surrounding mountains, Heidegger perceived a mutual base, particularly a wet one. Nothing like that falls within the purview of the ESS. In other words, ESS offers no scope for warranting. What I'm calling unstable expanding equilibrium, sociogeologists Clark and Sarzinski, in their book Planetary Social Thought, Anthropocene Challenge to the Social Sciences, explains that, and I quote them, the Earth is more than a single system that supports life. There are decouplings or disconnections in the planetary body as well as couplings. They introduce the idea of planetary multiplicities, by which they refer to the undeniable fact that, quote, the Earth has an inherent potential to shift from one state to another and to do this quickly. I must confess, it's still fuzzy for me because, that's my ignorance. One reason being, what is super fast in one sphere, say geologically, can be lesser slow in another, say biodiversity. Okay? Yet they match up to form harmony. It is only now, since the great acceleration, that man-made changes have brought about going beyond the repair space of the ESS. One of the peculiarities of bringing different spheres into one place, primarily planetary, biological, meaning biodiversity and human, they operate at different temporal scales from one another. The planetary operates at a scale of millions of years, the biological species on a smaller time scale, but even then hugely vast, tens of thousands of years, while the human operates on a minuscule scale. This has a huge epistemological root on which we do social and human studies. I mean our human-centric narrative, which does not take into agentic consideration the other two spheres. But now that we know that the house and the mountain next to it, a la Wittgenstein, are not as unrelated as we previously thought. Now that our terrestrial actions and decisions are going to determine the fate of the earth. অথবা আপনার থেকে আমি কিন্তু বেশি কাশছি আমার দিকে তাকিয়ে তাকাচ্ছি না। Now that a huge epistemological load and all that, but now that we know that the house and the mountain next to it, all of Wittgenstein, are not as unrelated as we previously thought. Now that our terrestrial actions and decisions are going to determine the fate of life itself, we have to devise new strategies of how to think the human in an interrelated manner with the geo and the biospheres. The path is not clear at all, but only in such attempts a new ethic of living in the Anthropocene may emerge. Clark and Szerzensky calls the Anthropocene a threshold concept, or what we called earlier a cusp time. It radically alters our perspective on the object of investigation through previous knowledge into a new constellation and thus opens up a new epistemological field. The third section, Anthropocene or capitalism. But mind you, I don't know how you would excuse me. I haven't read the most important book coming from the Marxists, that is Satan. I just got a few days back. And I don't understand what they mean by metabolism. That's the term I couldn't get. I begin with a quote. The mansion of modern freedoms stand on an ever-expanding foundation of fossil fuel use, unquote, Dipesh Chopra. I at times sit back and wonder whether the arrival of the Anthropocene would have been avoided if Lenin's October Revolution had spread all over the world, or whether it would have only been aggravated by the global egalitarian distribution of wealth. Lenin, when it came to military strategy, as you know, military strategy to follow for the revolution, had as his guru the Prussian military general and war strategist Karl von Clausewitz, whose book on war even today remains the Bible of modern warfare planning. Similarly, when it came to industrial development, he followed the Fordist principle. It needs some serious pondering whether it is capitalism or industrialism which is the main culprit for climate disaster. And more radically, whether for industrial development, the principles of socialism and capitalism are the same. Any form of human flourishing will cause carbon emissions. Humans, though through industrialism, have acquired the capacity to interfere with the planetary processes, but not the capacity to fix them as yet. The great predicament of modern civilization lies here. The other question is, as I have repeatedly said, demographic explosion and its impact on climate change, as already mentioned. In all possibilities, human population will become 10 billion by 2050, all of whom demand and deserve adequate food, healthcare, and shelter, the basics of living. How do we develop a humane but realistic understanding of the world around us? Speaking from the standpoint of planetary health and the Anthropocene, what happens if even a minimum adequate food, health care, and shelter are provided to the marginalized? Vaclav Schmil, the Czech-Canadian scientist of environment, concludes his massively researched book, Harvesting the Biosphere, with this cautionary words. Quote, if billions of poor people in low-income countries were to claim even half the current per capita harvest prevailing in affluent economies, too little of the earth's primary production would be left in its more or less natural state, and very little would remain for the mammalian species other than ours. What is the biosphere? It is the Earth's thin layer of light dating for nearly 4 billion years ago, when the first simple organism appeared. Many species have exerted enormous influence on the biosphere's character and productivity, but none has transformed the Earth in so many ways and on such a scale as the Homo sapiens. Without harvesting biomass, including energy, food, and raw material, Schmidt points out there would have been no story of human evolution and advancing civilization. We shape the planet through technology. So technology is an intrinsic part of this unfolding story about the humans. This has been called the technosphere. The technosphere is the whole world of network technologies to for be it for rapid extraction of free energy and subsequent power generation, nearly instantaneous communication across the globe, energy and mass transport, modern governmental and other bureaucratic technologies, industrial and manufacturing operations, global distributions, myriad additional or artificial or non-natural processes. Without these modern civilization and nearly 8 billion population would not exist. The technosphere has become a fundamental condition of existence. Chakraborty draws an example from Carl Schmitt. Consider a ship in the mid-ocean. If for some reason there is a major fault in the technological system, the ship will sink. Hence, compared to early days, modern ships are at once more durable and also more vulnerable. And here it seems, and Dipesh said that in a seminar, so amazing to think that human rise has been a few thousand years. I mean, not few thousand, 100,000 years. When they came down, and using stone pieces as weapon, broke the bone that all other animals have left, chewed the marrow, and that was the rise, from their food chain up to where it is. So enormously fast rise, and that would also be the reason of human fragility. Achha. What is the biosphere? It is the Earth's thin layer of life dating from nearly 4 billion years when the first simple organisms appeared. Many species have exerted enormous influence on the biosphere's character and adaptability, but none has transformed the Earth in so many ways. I have read it. Gotcha. Here a caveat is in place. Looking from the planetary, it is humanity as a whole, that is we, which has become the new geological agency. But looked closely, it is not the entire mass of humanity, as I already mentioned, that is effecting change on the geobiological in the same proportion or the same manner. With rapidly increasing numbers of the middle class, the idea of one planet, many worlds needs to be seen outside the national geographical division, but within each nation itself. This is particularly so in the rapidly rising countries like China, India, and now Nigeria. I'm almost covered more than 3/4. Nigel Clark and Szerzynski, in their article Planetary Social Thought, the Anthropocene Challenge to the Social Sciences, show how the weight, the wealth of geology was built by the exploitation of the larger part of the population. Hence, they conclude to socialize the Anthropocene, we need to geologize the social. If only a small minority is causing and has caused most of the emissions, and if historically it is global capitalism that has led to an unequal world, as well as ever accelerating industrialism and thus ever increasing emissions. Can we ignore this while taking into account how we reached where we have reached today? According to IPCC, that is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if fossil fuel emissions go at the current rate, the rise of global temperature by the end of this century will reach 4 degrees Celsius. In contrast, in order to limit the increase of global temperature by 2100 to 1.5 degrees Celsius at the current pace of CO2 emission, 1.5 degrees Celsius will be reached within 10 years. It is necessary to reduce CO2 emission by roughly half by 2030, and the net emission must be zero by 2050. This means the immediate reduction of CO2 emissions by roughly 7%. As of now, there is no sign of it absolutely. The main reason for this is a non-regulated market for infinite economic growth, partly due to the catching up phenomenon of now the recently rising what used to be called third world. So Marxists will argue that for climate change, what is primarily needed is system change. Incidentally, at present, India's growth rate of fossil fuel is highest. China is cooling down, though at the top of the chart with 4 plus, and the US a close second with 3 plus. Marx viewed the nature-human relationships in different ways in different places. At places, he sees nature as a datum of raw materials for human emancipation. At places, he saw more to it. When a tree is made into a table as part of human flourishing, human discovers their own ontological definition in this relation with nature. Humans are the homo faber, and Marx reads history and progress written into it. But there are places where Marx observes human nature metabolism whose concrete forms are mediated by existing social relationships. If that is so, ecological Marxists argue that by working on existing social relationships, the planet can be saved. Historians and social scientists following the Marxist track complain that the very coinage Anthropocene undervalues the role of capitalism in climate change. Many Marxist social scientists disapprove of the term species in the context of climate warming since for them all human problems arise from economic disparity. Even though Marx was quite unalarmed about using the term. In fact, it was his puzzle solver term. Whenever people get rid of some proposition, he will appeal to the species tree. For them, it is not the Anthropocene, a neutral category, but Capitalocene that tells the real story of planetarianism. I wish to emphasize that these are not either or binary, but two related terms distinguished analytically. At the same time, I would like to maintain that if Holocene is a geological phase, we need a geological term to replace it, not what caused it. Like, and like Chakraborty, for me too, the term Anthropocene does the job. There are many factors, including the axial tilt of the sun in relation to the arc that cause the Holocene, that is the warming of the arc and the gradual melting of the snow. If you ask me what caused the Anthropocene, I'll say it is primarily capitalism or the desire for endless human flourishing in keeping with the demands of the market. To be frank, so far we know of no other path to flourishing, or for that matter, providing minimal provision, food, transport, etc., other than industrialism. As discussed, capitalism and actually existing socialism never made a principal division in their use of fossil fuel and industrial production. Preferring to call the Anthropocene Capitalocene keeps the story at the humanocentric level and does not give us a good enough handle in grappling with the reality of Anthropocene, the ramifications of what it means to say that from now on it is human activities that will collectively determine the behavior of the planet. And from now and from now onwards, analytically, the human story can be no more kept separate from those of geology and species history, regardless of how vastly different the temporalities are. This represents an unfathomably difficult epistemological challenge, as I've already mentioned. Here is the great dilemma. From the standpoint of planetary change, what matters is human activities as a collectivity. But from the standpoint of human collectivity, what it is the activities of groups, classes, individuals, and fight against injustice and inequality and for democracy. We don't yet have a language for the combined articulation of the fight, says Chakraborty, against injustice and climate threat. If the globe of globalization and the globe of global warming do not refer to the same process, how do we make them converge with our scheme of doing no effort? As yet, we don't have a language, as I said, for combined articulation. The fundamental premise of politics, that is, the securing of human lives, is undermined by the same institutions which promise to do so. If the intellectual toolkits through which we conceptualize our lives, our socio-economic organization, and the lives around us have failed, and if our attempt to secure ourselves has resulted in increasing danger, then we need a fundamental change in our mode of thinking and priorities. In the next and last section, ethics of living in the planetary times, I seek to do precisely that. I cannot offer any eureka, any glimpse of a magic vista, but just narrate the hurdles that we face in our search for a new grammar of life and living. The anthropogenic times for a new ethic of living. Soon after, the casualty rates of the second spike started coming down steadily, and the TV channels stopped showing those horror images of corpses floating down the Ganga. It was business as usual and never flew. Even though people were not unaware of the prospect of another pandemic knocking on the doors sooner than later. One can understand why the rickshawala took out his vehicle, the thelawala his cart, the vendor hers or his ware, the supermarket salespersonnel flocked to their jobs, and the migrant workers to the cities from which they had fled less than a year back, trekking down hundreds of kilometers back home on foot. But for the middle class professionals to jostle for their regular dose of entertainment simply strange. The mixture of paranoia and desire for pleasure must have invited years and years of psychoanalytic meditation. I'm missing Anup here. But here I am restricting myself to understanding what has been termed as capitalist realism by Marxist social theorist Mark Fisher, and also from a very different perspective, Akhil Bilrami's recent book, Culture, Capitalism, and Governance. Fisher examines the perverse conviction in most people that what has been happening since the Great Acceleration might be the surest way of destruction of the planetary unity, of planetary unity on which depends life as such, not merely human. But there is no other way out of neoliberal capitalism. We need to accept it and live in the present. The work of neoliberal hegemony is to make this idea part of our common sense, effacing its historicity, the conditions of its possibility, and the contingency of social arrangement which it legitimates. In the post-colonial neoliberal economy, thanks to the ever higher technology and burgeoning population, not more than 15% of the total population can be effectively employed. The rest now live on doles and support systems of various kinds or many kinds of disguised unemployment and hence have very little political agency, thus paving the way for populism of various kinds. Look at the political promises of the parties before the polls. In substance, they're all the same. BJP additionally has an ideological agenda of majoritarianism. Talking of employment structure, we notice two strands emerging. A reserved army of workers in the upper layers of the service sector, including the software industry, reflected in the increasingly lower wage rate, and a vast population of sheer surplus among the majority of poor working population. Under the neoliberal regime, we have witnessed a passage from top-down bureaucracy to decentralized bureaucracy with a profusion of tabulation jobs due to random empiricism and surveillance, or what Deleuze calls from the punctuated time of periodic assessment to the more open time of continuous assessment. I will talk to any college teacher. Most of the time, what she would be doing are these tabulations, preparing for NAM, this, that. The employee tells herself that all of those things she does are meaningless. And it is a fact she's perfectly aware. The employer also assures her that what she does in her spare time after work is her own business, her own decision. But more often than not, back from work, we are engaged in updating our Facebook profiles or something like that. In other words, we are the anxious curators of our own identity. The subjective states become the reality of a domain we think we don't believe, but this is the new form of belief. Citing Deleuze once again, we can say this is the perfect state of neurotic individualism. It is quite clear that neoliberal capitalism has not only changed the economic and social map, but by ushering in planetary crisis, mankind will be faced with fundamental disbalances to which we are not used to on the scale it is going on. For instance, salinization of the soil, as a result of which huge areas of low-lying coastal areas will become uninhabitable, uncultivable in the coming decades. What happens when all these people in their millions start moving towards the mainland? What happens to our much cherished notion of national boundaries, or for that matter, of nation? We need to cultivate a collective sensibility which willingly shares the crumbling resources. But would that ever happen? We need a new ethic of living, uh, a new practice of cooperation. But how to achieve this formidable task? As I mentioned before, I cannot offer any golden solution or formula. Instead, by reading critically philosopher Akhil Bilgram's recent book, Capitalism, Culture and Commons, I shall try to point out the hurdles on the way. Discussing English agriculture, Bilgrami argues that before capitalism brought in the notion of enclosures were commons, that is, expanses of land shared collectively for cultivation, grazing, foraging, and such other things. Even the feudal estates allowed such common practices. Philosopher John Locke supported the privatized enclosures, where someone marks out a territory where he employs others to do the cultivation, and in return, those people receive wages. His arguments follow the line of what modern economists would call the Pareto principle. That is, no one is worse off than before, while some become richer. Locke completely ignores the entire history of widespread resistance to enclosures, which is again a history of 300 years. Instead, he foregrounds enclosures and thus capitalist enterprise as a victory of self-centric economic interest on which lies the basis of capitalist entrepreneurship. Modern economics supports Locke's principle by drawing an analogy from what is known as prisoner's dilemma. What if I pay or offer sacrifice for collective interest, but others don't? Is a question asked. Here, Milgram recites a fascinating anecdote. As a young boy, he was walking with his father on the Bombay beach when he found a wallet containing money. Dad, can I take it? His father said, no, you just leave it there. But then someone else will take it. No, said his father. If you don't take it, no one else will. Bilgram was here pointing to a whole different way of life with a different set of ethos outside any moralistic principle, one which he calls unalienated existence. As against Locke's self-centrism, he mentions from economics opportunity cost. He admits that the privatization of land and the recruitment of wage labor to work on the land does make everyone better off than they were in the state of nature. But it does not make them better off than they would have been if the land was not privatized in the first place and there was a collective cultivation of commons instead. Bilgrami is right in pointing out that the commons, be it lands commons or environmental commons or knowledge commons, cannot be governed by regulation. That is to say, by policing and punishing non-cooperation. Here he cites Einstein. Einstein. We cannot solve our problems within the thinking that we used when we created those problems. We need a new framework, but how can we attain a new and necessary framework? The framework for Belgrami lies in what he calls in cultural commons, which he explains as follows. Behind the discursive and linguistically articulated representational world lies the non-discursive or non-representational communal practices, collective memories, trust, and experiences that are not always captured by the knowledgeable forms of life. The foregrounded discursive field of explicitly articulated concepts and knowledges makes sense against a background of non-discursive concept of the world. In this background beliefs, practices, which is not necessarily knowledge filtered, lie the resources of unalienated life. I doubt whether this background of unalienated life can accommodate fragmentation or gaps of alienation. Bilgrami hasn't given anything. Instead, for his support, he quotes Marx of the Grundrisse. And here is Marx again, another take on man-nature relation. Quote, being unalienated is an ideal that is constitutive of what we are when we are most representatively human. To deny this is to deny our species. Wittgenstein does not consider human forms of life as species acts. Bilgrami at one or two places referred to Wittgenstein. But I think Wittgenstein does not consider human forms of life as species acts. It is some primitives in habits, not something that is put in our minds, brains, formed by specific habits, not as if they lie in the brain waiting to express themselves. Commitment to species involve positing a biological essence, a theory of genes, and a theory of evolution of the genes. Suppose you are inducing a child into the game of arithmetic. You keep two apples on one side of the table and another one on the other, and ask the child to count maybe with their fingers how many apples are there. Now, if the child asks you back, what happens if the apples are dipped into a jar of acid? They will melt, and then how do I count the apples? Okay. Or what happens when two drops of water become one? Okay. The child is still making sense, but has gone beyond the game of arithmetic. Or say when he or she sneezes, and when he or she says, Oita, ekhane, as a baby does, they are making referential statements. In the later case, Oita, ekhane, that slowly will give the linguistic ability. But when the child sneezes and inquires what happens to the droplets that they sneezed, a valid question again, but that has taken him to another thing. Philosophically speaking, with the Anthropocene looming around, the time has come to look back the way humanity has framed itself especially from the time of enlightenment, the frame which we are used to take as quote unquote us. We are destined to leave this humanity as something already gone, says Claire Goldbrook, already absent, missing and past. You know, if Dipesh Chakraborty, I think Dipesh Chakraborty calls it the difficulty of being poor. Something similar he was perhaps having in mind. It does not mean being thrown back to the past of enlightenment. Rather, it is living the present in what I would like to call humanity war, to live in the absence of what we are. The question that interests me, how does this word, what does this word mean for the larger part of world population? Those who live outside the territorial waste. What Kant in his essay Perpetual Peace referred to that vast unknown held tenuously between the temporal and the anthropological. People who experience this construct of humanity through a skewed path. Can this humanity void, as I called it, which is also a theory void, for it is largely a theory construct, be addressed by theory putting itself on its own rival? I have no answer. This has inspired theory to advocate the post-human, or better post-humanism. So when we give up our enlightenment baggage and try to approximate the animal, becoming animal. I do not believe in this formulation. They are going to has a wonderful take on this. Here, Derrida's caveat is important that animal is not necessarily only repository of bestiality. It inheres the human as well. Taking the animal as a reverse image of the human is part of theory's humanity. Instead of toiling over the theory machine, how the theory machine has influenced the rest of the world, I keep my gaze fixed to the next 200 years. How will we or can we live collectively in the coming disruptive times? What will be a new ethic of living? Citing an example from Chakraborty, either it is there in his book or in one of his online talks. The daily worker in Delhi's summer, living in a slum, needs to sleep well at night for the next day's labor, and hence a cheap AC is a necessity, not a luxury. She has no time to, and this is me, she has no time to ponder about the cloak of humanist theory fostered on the colonies by the West. At any rate, much like before, she, like others of her class, has not only experienced dominance without hegemony, and it is still continuing. In this geopolitical scenario, what we, the intelligentsia, can demand from our rulers, both of our country as well as of the West, is that they bear the cost of replacement of cheap air conditioners by better but expensive ones which emit less CFCs. This is one way they pay their debt to the marginalized of the developing world. Keeping my nihilism aside, allow me to conclude the paper by remembering again Bill Graham's anecdote. If you don't take it, no one else. As you can make out, I am concluding the paper with a non-answer, but one that fills the mind with joy, this small group. How lovely would have been an unalienated world. Thank you. You see, I have a request to Dipesh. Dipesh, I have a request. We were supposed to have a conversation in October in Dehradun, which never happened because of my, ill health. So Dipesh, do you mind saying something? Because see, as you can make out,
I will work after I've got myself in a better physical state.
where?
I need to go to the.
Okay. No.
You start the conversation, I'll jump in. Sorry, I'll be too stressed.
হ্যাঁ বলো শক্ত প্রশ্ন কোনটা ভাই অনির্বাণ অর্ণব চ্যালেঞ্জ একদম তো শেষে এলো questions Patada, why don't you?
আমি এই বিষয়ে কিছু জানি
আমিও তো কিছু জানি না Yeah, please. Can you introduce yourself? Sit down and sit down and you don't have to stand.
I am Dr. Abhishek. I am principal of RV Institute of Management.
Okay.
Thank you for such a wonderful and almost poetic lecture. Also, thank you for scaring the already scared people. My question, while I was thinking of, especially if you do not pick up, nobody will. I had three thoughts in mind.
Yeah.
One was when you were the Heidegger's mutual gaze.
Yeah.
And then when he speaks of being in the world.
Yeah.
So that is one.
Yeah.
Second is the invisible hand, which again you referred to in some way, of Adam Smith. And the invisible world, invisible hand, which is becoming more and more visible. And the third thing is Gandhi's community-centric or village-centric life. Now, if we look at these three, would you like to tie these three together? Do you think there is some kind of seed of hope?
See, I mean, it's good that you brought in Gandhi because Akhil Bilgrami, as you know, is very close to Gandhi's thought. He's writing a book for quite some time. And he does mention Gandhi. And I'm sure when he was writing this anecdote, he had Gandhi in mind.
His father was a very committed guy.
Bilgrami's father, who said, no, you don't take it. This is a typical Gandhian position that if you don't take, nobody else. Now, Adam Smith could be ulta because profit maximizing and all that. And what was the other one? The Heidegger exam.
Being in the world.
Yeah,
Where you harmony with nature, and not only that, it's a mutual.
Yeah, that here, you see, when I say that allows no reciprocity, I was referring to the planet. Heidegger wasn't referring to the planet when he says that the wet mountain gaze back at him. He was talking of the art, of the world, worlding, you can say, of dwelling. This is dwelling, actually. So these two go very well.
In reference to Heidegger, I basically saw something that it might sound like a fact.
You're the one who's a film.
You take them.
Incidentally, he is Devojyoti, did his PhD with me, and I think one of the best students I've ever Yeah. এবার আর শক্ত প্রশ্ন করতে পারবে।
No, it was just a comment, I think. So recently I saw Leibniz's evaluation of Heidegger, and I think Leibniz's critique to Heidegger is that in his notion of being in the world, um, what Heidegger is thinking is about human possibilities, which does not disallow us to think nature or think of the arts in terms of resource education. So one can be in the world, resource education. So one can be in the world, one can try to maximize one's potentials through an ecstatic opening, and yet one can not take nature seriously. But but still, Heidegger has more, some openings or more possibilities in his writing, and I think his later notion of releasement or letting be might better suit what we are looking for, which is an epic living endangered planet.
Devotati, you know this philosophers much more than I do, honestly. But letting be, doesn't it come very close to Levinas, in a certain way? When he talks about uh, openings, opening the other as, an opening to fathom into. Doesn't it come close to Levinas? I ask this because you said that they were, at cross purposes or whatever. So what do you think?
I think okay, it might come close to Davis, but I don't know. I still like to separate Levinas's, the philosophy of responsibility, the responsibility towards the other, and Heidegger's notion of releasement feel apart because
That's true. Yeah.
So this was a comment, and I have a question. Let me pose that. So what seems to me, okay, it seems that you have been suggesting in your lecture that there is something intrinsically exploitative in the way humans conduct themselves, and also in some patterns of our thought. When you think, okay, when you think in terms of subjects and objects, when you are objectifying it, thinking. So do we need a different kind of thinking before going into practice, or in other terms, do we need a different logic than those that we have known so far? So I was trying to think of the parallax situation between the different time scales that you mentioned, geological, biological, and human. And it seems that there is primarily a contradiction between two things: the world of human, the world of politics, where you try to think of human freedom, and the world of the sphere of the arts, where a response that transcends the political might be needed. Okay, so human freedom was traditionally thought as something opposed to human domination, the domination of humans over other humans. And Anthropocene discloses that there is really no such opposition, that socialist countries or socialist economies might behave in the same way as capitalist economies do in exploiting nature. So human dominance and human freedom, which form contrast or dialectic, may be subletted into dominance over nature. So, my question is, if we try to think, or if we try to undo um, the tendency inherent in thought to, to think in terms of dominance over nature, whenever we try to think of freedom. So, do we need to another kind of logic that would not be dialectical, that would be non-direct, and in simple terms. Okay, I'm taking too much time, I guess. So
I'll just answer one or two things that you said. One is, humans not only exploit nature, take nature as the raw material for flourishing, they cannot but exploit nature. So that point has to be taken into account. It's not so much a moralistic standpoint. Like I'll give you one example which I cited at least twice, that if you have to organize food and other basics of living to 8 billion people, and each of whom deserves, to be served better, then nature will be exploited even more. See, that's the whole point. Now you can start thinking, what if in the 50s and 60s, India and China, when the population was, exploding, had put more attention. But you see, we do not know what was then, because, the question of hunger was, so enormous at that point of time. But it could have been done, I believe, because then Xiaoping, in 1999, 1979, in the plenary, they took a decision that the Chinese fertility rate should come down from 4.4 to 1.3, and which they did in 20 years. And if you read Susan Greenhalgh's book, you'll know that it is not only through coercion. The first thing they did was massive investment in medical technology, okay, of sterilization and other things, and also campaigning at different levels, okay, including door-to-door campaign. So Deng Xiaoping did, but I will excuse the nations leaders of both India and China for not giving adequate, importance to population control in 50s and 60s, given that the situation was abysmally bad when the British left. So the other question that actually answers the question of flourishing. But the question of whether we can find out another logic is precisely what I was trying to do in the last section, ethic of living in the new age. And I don't think, I didn't go for any dialectical logic there. Neither Mark Fisher nor Bill Ramy were using any dialectical logic. Just by avoiding dialectical logic, we can find such a new ethic. But we can discuss this later. Dipesh, you need to borrow please.
I didn't come prepared to say that. I simply came in the.
না না বাবা এই বইগুলো লিখতে তোমার 10 বছর লেগে যায়, তোমার প্রিপেয়ার আর কি হবে?
One question you might want to think about, and I think that also it's like, why does global warming does not capture our emotions in the same way as, say, Ramdanavami does, or the temple issue does, or I mean, obviously everybody is saying it's a universal problem, everybody's talking it's an urgent problem, and yet you see the war in Palestine engage us. That war engages us immediately. So I think there's So there's a disconnect, it seems to me, between political emotions and then issues like global warming. And maybe we have some thoughts about that. And I'm often both sort of interested to observe it and puzzled by it, you know. And there's also a division, like in a campus in America, sometimes this becomes an issue. There's activism around, right? For instance, our students will want to know. I think it appears to that Princeton is actually digging a huge hole to use thermal energy.
To use,
Thermal energy
okay,
for their heating purposes and actually also to store heat, they get rid of use of fossil fuel to heat the building or even to cool them down. So sometimes is it even though it's kind of discussed as a universal issue, is it more a Western issue? Or is it a more distant issue for political emotions? Then issues like the Gaza, the killing in Gaza, or what happened Dave Grayson in this country, right? So maybe you have some thoughts about those things.
no, Dipesh, I think again in your book perhaps, you have given some inkling into this problem. When you say that the climate issues out there, but for many people, they would think I didn't cause it. It was, a small set, and I can't do anything about it. Neither can you do anything about it. So there is an inevitability about it. Right? While, like day before, on the chowkidar of our building, I inquired after him to find that he has quietly gone to the local Ram temple to offer. And I just don't see it as what I say BJP's ideological advance or I don't see it as something jaunty. When this chap, our Chowkidar, does this, it involves a history, a personal history, a familial history that goes, even before the time he was born. So that way it's very close to it. While two things why the political emotion is different regarding climate change. One is that I didn't cause it, I'm a poor man. It's those rich people who are causing it. And second is that how are we going to stop? Stopping means stopping flourishing also. Isn't that too much of a price?
See, maybe just say, and then you can say more. There are two contradictory arguments we make. One argument is that we're the poor person, the poor nation. Says I didn't cause it, so why should I have to do something? And the other argument is that the poor will actually suffer more. So even if you didn't cause it, if it's causing you suffering, there should be some political emotion around it. You see the problem? So in some respects, see, there's no political, like, I mean, you talk about ethics, and ethics in some ways personalize it. What would I do? Should I pick up a wallet or not? Should I give a different kind of lifestyle? And that's fine. But actually, nothing happens about anything without that becoming political. Nothing becomes political without there being political emotion. So the idea that the poor person is saying, I have no emotions because it's inevitable. But if the inevitable is going to harm, right? Then the proposition that you didn't do it is not helping you. If that proposition leads to inactivity or kind of an emotional indifference to the problem. So actually, there's an interesting problem.
Yeah, there is a problem.
For which I don't know the answer.
Sir, can I ask some, so is it this, disengagement, but doesn't this disengagement come from the, disproportion between what I can do and what,
Yeah,
what extent it can
the
be?
problem is. If it is a, so the question is. If it is an issue. For which you're not responsible. But it's going to actually do more bad to you than to the person who is responsible. Then you have to do something about the harm that will cause. So actually,
Maybe people don't believe that.
so the question is, what allowed us to afford the disengagement? Why is the disengagement affordable? If the proposition that it's harming you is true,
Sir, I have problem with the chair. Let me introduce myself. I'm Joita Banerjee. I come from Bankura, and in the last state election, there was one person with Porivesh or environment in their agenda, and he failed miserably. He was from we have an ecological warrior group, and from there he fought in elections and he lost miserably. And his agenda was environment. From there, and the question that you are telling that I work with some slum children. I'm a high school teacher. I teach first generation learners, but that is in a rural setting. But in an urban setting, I work with the slum children. On that occasion of the Ram Pratishtha, Ram Lala, Ram Pratishtha, etc., those children went and lit diyas as they were told. But those very children from the very slum, they regularly go to some place, I don't know yet, where they pray to Jesus every Sunday. They don't see any harm in lighting diyas for Ram or going to the Jesus to pray to Jesus on every Sunday. But one thing that haunts me, the rural children, those who are closer, I feel the rural children are much closer to nature till. But what will happen to the children that are living in the urban margins? I'm taking a little more time.
No, please do.
Because I want to share something. My experience with those children is, one day we were all studying, they were studying, I teach them English. Because they want to. English is their language of dignity and they want to learn English. So when I was talking with them, suddenly I was reading from something, there was owl. And I said, "Fence." All the children started playing. They just did. I said, "What are you doing?" I know they think about snakes. Though we know the snake is the symbol of healing, but snake in Bengali households, at night they don't mention snake. They don't say it's sharp. They show it like this, or they say lota or something like that. But those children, when I said owl or matcha, they started worshipping. I said, "What happened?" They say, "No, if you say owl at night, the owl gets disturbed, and we have to offer in our mind. We have to offer 5 fruits and 5 flowers, and then we have to pray to the owl. We can't mention owl." To me, it was something that was sometimes back or some generation back very closer to nature. But now, where they live, the slum they live, there is no scope of any nature or nothing is around them. But still they are related to nature. But how will I make them understand that what is global warming, what is climate crisis? They don't see that. If there is they do their Manusha Puja. They don't have any from the Brahmin community or anything, they do it themselves.
no, I'm just pointing out, Joita, that there's a funny set of propositions. So on one hand, you say that the poor nations, people not responsible for global warming will suffer more. But people more responsible for global warming are the people who are more concerned about it. So then it seems like the people who do harm to others, they also are used to. Right? And people who are being harmed
Oh,
are completely, so there's nothing wrong with this proposition.
yeah.
So that's why I asked the question, why do you think that happens? So is there something wrong in what we're saying? if the proposition is just that people here don't care because it's going to happen to me anyway, I'm too powerless, right? But then, do people actually not do something about that which is affecting them?
Yeah.
And they do here,
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, part of the political society proposition wouldn't have. Come on, right? Because people do something proactively about that which they think is direction. So I'm just raising it as a puzzle in the global discourse. That we are actually portraying the West as both the party responsible for the harm and the party that is probably more altruistic
Hmm.
because they're aware of it and wanting to do something. And the poorer nations as both not responsible for it, but also exposed to more harm and yet being less involved. But this is something that doesn't work about these sentences. And maybe we need to rethink this problem.
But you know what, even then, I have three proper kind of questions to you, but just to respond to the conversation. But it is not just only on the question of environment versus other political emotions. But let's say the example of demonetization and how it actually affected the entire gamut of political society, or someone like Stephen Collenberg and on the Chakraborty called this world of the club. These are other separate categories that have been in the constitution of capitalist system as such. But then the same people who are badly affected or negatively affected will flock and vote for the lady it actually happens. So it's not just only on the question of the environment and people. The other example, the communal kind of rights. People know that they will be negatively affected on the rights, but at the same time, they vote for it.
That's the problem for which there is a template, right? Why do people behave against their own interests or what seems to them? That's the book too. The book that has been discussed a decade ago, right? Because what was wrong with cancers or something like that. It was about why do working class people vote for people who don't actually. So that could be an old problem in social science. You can have theory about consciousness, you know, all kinds of theories. So I'm just asking, is this a problem which we then apply for consciousness? Is this a problem?
But the that's the again has been also kind of
Sure,
criticized
that-
and questioned and
I mean, that's what I'm saying that there's a series of propositions floating around. When I look at them collectively, they seem very paradoxical.
Yeah, but Dipesh, we'll come back to it. Among the young people I've seen, particularly slightly articulate up the layer.
So again, people say, how this?
No, they seem to be very aware,
Yeah.
very aware.
But is awareness a matter of feelings? That's what I'm saying.
Yes, but you know, as you were saying, those who did that with the solar warming at Princeton, maybe otherwise driving a very big car.
No, this is the thing, the university makes a decision, all I'm saying is that it's a live issue. Right? I'm not saying a particular person is aware, I'm just saying there are emotions around.
Yeah.
People go out on huge marches, like one part was telling me, there was a huge march in New York against global warming.
True.
And so so global warming is a very interesting phenomenon because everybody is saying that people not responsible. See, the whole bargain at the COP level about the loss and damages found is actually based on the proposition that people who are not responsible for the warming will suffer.
Mm.
But when you actually look at political emotions that say engagement, you broadly see that people who are supposed to be, or nations that are supposed to be
More active.
more by what's happening. There are much less political emotions around the issue in those nations. I mean, China is different, however. China is much more technocratic, managerial position of these things. But in India is fascinating. So, I mean, listen to Jairam Ramesh. Jairam Ramesh, when he was there, would always say that we have a huge coastline and the glaciers of the globe. We are exposed. Right? So you'll expect this to be something that generates. So I think
Yeah, and as Joyita was saying that if you have global warming as one of your election agenda, you know, suppose you are contesting, you can be very well sure that you are going to lose.
So that's the question I'm asking about whether you or somebody else has any thoughts. Within a current paradox, because I think you can't have political mobilizations without political emotions,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And there's the history of political emotions.
Mm.
And people have written books on Martin Luther wrote a book on political emotions. And it's an interesting proposition as to why this issue doesn't generate political emotions. That's right.
Okay. No, before that, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Shared agency, sharing responsibility. So now we have active network theory where we are sharing agency with the planet, but the planet is not active, right? You proposed as, so we share agency with the happiness with those who are privileged. But again, in academia, we propose this view that we have to move beyond the enlightenment ideas, that we have to move beyond the humanocentric anthropocentric discourse. So we are slowly moving beyond it, but Anthropocene again, what it does is it perceives the idea that the human is the part. The human agents is now entangled with geological agency, geological time coexists. So human time progresses slowly, yet it has some intermediate life. So my question is, if academia chooses to move towards would be non-humanism, beyond post-humanism, to non-humanism. So
That's even
how-
more complicated, because there, beyond the human, we don't really know what the emotions are.
Exactly, but there is an interest, right? So again, but when we come to the question of the subordinates again, how do we conceptualize both of them?
Your question is a very increased important, it's a my book or whatever. This is about one. Something you're saying, you can't both expect world about this shared agencies. And then only blame humans will not have to. Right, so you think that, but that's it, it's not. Let's say you're reading a fine conception, I can't do it. Right, I'm reading a different conception. I'm just saying if you accept that, the observation on which all the climate negotiation begins, that people, nations with historical responsibility will be less harm. Like global warming, that nation will less historical responsibility. As the story goes inside countries, as the richer people will be affected less with resources than women. So if that proposition is true, and if the harm is happening now, I mean, the harm is not happening now, then it's simple. I'm not in harm, what should I do? But if the harm is happening now, then is there a paradox in the situation where you see that the people being harmed are much less vocal about it than the people who are causing the harm? And I think doesn't that, sometimes I think doesn't that kind of make the West, which is otherwise evil, all kind of, an entity who's always significant. If you say you have to do all the things that needed to be done, why should I do that? I'm not responsible, but my house is burning. When the fire stuff has to come from somewhere in the house. That just doesn't make sense. So maybe people are not doing enough. Maybe the proposition is wrong. Just we go.
No, it could be a kind of, the time scale, Gaza, we must do something immediately because people are dying.
So,
But when will the eastern coast of India go under the water?
so this is a very interesting question, buried in what you're saying, which is that we need to then think about the relationship between political temporality. Are there multiple temporalities and emotions?
Yes,
So human beings produce multiple temporalities out of this.
yeah,
And on what grounds?
yeah.
If the harm is real.
Mm.
So if the stories about Sundarban women
Mm.
getting fungal infection in the reproductive organs,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And rogue doctors moving in and sort of performing hysterectomy on them. If these stories are true,
Mm.
then clearly people are being affected at the same time the other one is happening.
Mm.
And the other one is dramatic, expected, it's the media, across the region, it's a global, it's much more important than the Ukraine.
Mm.
It mobilized many more people, many more sentiments, for historic reasons.
Mm.
After the went up. And that started, so, there's something needs to be explained. But in other words, you can explain in terms of the world having had a repertoire of anti-colonial sentiments, the very fact that many people have looked at the Israel Palestine situation in terms of occupation, in terms of apartheid-like system, in terms of the Nakba,
Yeah.
right? So so it kind of feeds into a whole range of political emotions that have had to do, that have had to grow in our having to deal with colonialism, apartheid, rape, right? Or ethnic cleansing. And in other words, just see, so in Nabil, I'm asking the client, it's obviously an interesting question, when you think about it. And it's an interesting puzzle. So maybe, as we think more about it, maybe you can probe these questions.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Moidul, you have questions?
Yeah, there's a-
There are plenty.
Waiting.
No, Moidul raised his hand before.
Right. No, I have, I think your, conceptualizing of of this category of the capitalist, instead of the Anthropocene, you're making a capitalism. I think that needs to be probed a little more. This is precisely because, but as you rightly pointed out in the paper also, that if you also take into account the 1950s onwards, then the so-called socialist countries, like particularly the former Soviet Union and Great China, during this acceleration period also had a huge role to play in terms of, global warming or environmental problems. So I guess at today's time, of course, you are rightly pointing out also claims that it's a socialist country. Now, then I think the Anthropocene is still a better category. Or other ways, you give a caveat that, the former Soviet Union or China, these are essentially state capitalist projects, which is a form of capitalism, which is essentially capitalism. So I think that could be one way of, just to, for a more robust kind of a concept for that.
Yeah, but you see, these people, I mean, the point is that why I said that this is not either or. But a geological term should be replaced by another geological. This is one thing. The other thing is the Saito project. The man. He is not challenging me here by any means. They are now looking at green marks. That is Marx in this last few years, notebooks of Marx, isn't it? Some side notes he had taken, where he had certain pious things to say about human relation with nature, what has happened by destruction of nature. But the point is whether that found a place in Marx's theory of history. That is something to be taken into account. Like you can also, some tyrant can also write some lovely poems. I mean, that is a different thing.
The second point is that, so let me play a devil's advocate.
Huh?
Let me play a devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Which is that I completely agree with the Benita's that Delhi, it is essentially a Western problem. And I think there is also a kind of a north-south dividing largely one system. But I think there is also the political emotions are not active here on the environmental questions because of the question immediacy. So the shanties and the slums, if you talk about the entire shanties and the slums, both on the side of the Tolina, Adigong. Well, they get doles from the state. They don't. Sometimes they are also beneficiaries of this Narendra Modi Ujjwala Yojana. But then they are only registered as the first time Ujjwala scheme for it. But they don't have enough money to get the second cylinder. So why they go? They again go back to the traditional mode of cooking, where they use the plants, taken from the and they so and that actually creates a lot of. During the winter times, it's just that they are poor, they can't afford, heating systems and all. They use traditional modes of, fire.
Madhu, your
And at the
question?
same time,
Yeah.
The ponds and the nalas are getting completely polluted by these. You see. So the question is that lack of awareness, at the same time, the lack of, the immediate problem is here, that they first need the house, shelter, food, clothing, all these. Then the environmental problem will be less something like civil society activists, the shoulders of the, who will be, petitioning and all, but then that question is essentially Western state. Post-Marxists first raised this question that how the left should organize all these, gender, race, environment question, way back in the 1980s. But it still remained in the Western corner. You had green parties and ecological parties in the eco-socialists also in Europe. But it never got that thing here. So I think I guess the larger philosophical problem is the progress versus evolution. Well, the progress is largely, short term, immediate, and it's a more of a political problem. But the evolution is the larger philosophical problem. Where you're doing a long term kind of thing, thinking about history in terms of that. I think that's.
But at the moment, as you was narrating your thing, something struck me which would also again be in the patient's question. Like in Dehradun where I live, there is a cook who comes. And by now I have two cooks because one fell ill. And something that surprised me is that the kind of attention they take about their kids. And the kids came to me and I said that which subject do you like most? Both the brother and sister said ecology, climate change. They are now part of the syllabus from class 3, 4. And the mother is very happy. You see, I mean, I am just wondering what will happen when these people come to the fore, because now we think we can postpone, something very disastrous is going to happen at a scale much wider than Gaza, because the whole world is going to go down. But I can postpone at the time. Why am I worried personally? Because of my son, my students, you, my friends. Otherwise it becomes an intellectual problem for me, intellectual moral problem, but not what Dipesh is saying, that political effect. It doesn't carry that political effect. He's waiting for a very long time.
I was just thinking about the concept of nature, the concept of nature as it is being programmed. Actually, the concept of nature, the concept of nature and things related to it. We are saying, why people are not that conscious about the geological catastrophe or the impending geological catastrophe. One thing is, like, there are people who are conscious. I have seen, as we call it sometimes, that some of our science colleagues they are politically conservative. The other side of the thing, the politically conservative people conscious about the ecology, environment, because it's a pertinent question, it will affect everyone on Earth. Otherwise, you are being politically conservative. So I think there are multiple temporalities at work, and when we fetishize the idea of nature as something which is timeless, changeless, and conceptually, out there, as opposed to the social sciences ideas of religion, caste, etc., which are kind of ideological things. So can we think of the concept of nature? I was just thinking about the book Ecology Without Nature by Timothy Morton. I think it's an important book. He was talking about how the concept of nature itself, causes some degree of damage to our process of thinking when we keep this ideological and non-ideological, the ideological political question and the non-ideological question of the nature. So it creates a certain kind of crisis. And also, when you are talking about the kind of commons, there is always the danger of reducing, the poor people, the marginalized people, who will take responsibility of the art, because then they are more akin to nature, they are more close to nature, they know the nature well. So that kind of discomfort, how the conceptualization, the very conceptualization of the human and the art, it is actually a process of bonding, which is making constructing both the geological and the human.
Yeah, that's true, but it is from this kind of questions that we quite often come to the question of posthumous.
Yeah,
Yeah, as if I can have, a construct of the human which is non anthropocentric. As if that human can come from the ecology, ecological forms, which are not to be supported.
no, I'm not also
Yeah.
correlation into that.
Yeah.
Kind of correlation is philosophy.
Yeah, but now, one thing again, as you were saying, it struck me. See, previously, even during COVID times, when I told, this girl who used to work for us, COVID at Tikani, who and get vaccinated, it's a COVID bottle it's for rich people. That has gone. If I tell the lady who comes here to my Salinpur Road house about the ecological problems, she no more says that it is borolocation. She only told me that, Dada, 5 বাড়িতে খেটে তারপরে আর কিছু থাকে না গো শরীরে। This is the thing. So that has changed, that ecological problems are for rich people. We are more concerned with hunger, resolving the problem of hunger. That has changed. This much I can tell you. About the other question about nature, we will talk. I'm getting a bit tired. Right. ওরে বাবা, বাইরে চলো না, চলো।
Yes, thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you very much. দিবস, তুমি কতদিন আছো? আমি 28 তারিখ চলে যাচ্ছি, তাই বোধহয় আর দেখা হবে না। তুমি ভালো থেকো। নেক্সট কবে আসছো? দিল্লি বা কলকাতা? আমি কিছু ঠিক নেই। বুড়ো হয়ে যাচ্ছে? তোমাকে তো দেখে খুব ইয়াং মনে হচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ, বলো।
No, no.
আচ্ছা, আবার ব্যাগ রেখো, ওই ব্যাগ। এই জয়টা তুমি চা খাবে, চলো না। ডাইরেক্ট ক্যান্টিন খোলা থাকবে। চলো, তুমিও চলে দেখতে পারো। কেন?
So, I had a question, but one thing I would like to share is that I was one of the candidates who was supposed to attend the UPS cultural studies
কি যেন নাম?
Novelty Balance.
হ্যাঁ, ওটা তো
So I still repent, for not being able to attend such a wonderful workshop actually.
Yeah, that many people are telling me and are making me feel more and more guilty. আমাকে ওটা
Sure.
এই যে
এটা।
So whatever question you have, is send me by email.
Oh, no,
হ্যাঁ, এটাই তো।
এসব করছি না, এটা প্রজেক্টরটা দাঁড়া।
তুমি খেলতে পারবো?
ও sí, ওটা লাগবে।
এই ঠিক করে বড় তো কেমন হয়েছে?
হ্যাঁ, খুব ভালো।
You can walk me on this one more time.
কি বলবে? টাকা দেবে, আগে বলবে তো,
কি করতে গেলে?
বাবা,
পেন আছে হাতের কাছে?
এই তো আছে। এইটা না তোমাদের খুব ভালো অভ্যেস জানো, আমরা লোকজনকে ওখানে ডেকে নিয়ে যাই, কিচ্ছু টাকা পয়সা নেই।
কমই দিই, জেনারেলি আরো বেশি দিই। গরিব গুলো
আমরা করি। হয়ে গেছে আমারটা?
হ্যাঁ।
হয়ে গেছে না, আমি যাই এবার।
হুম।
এই যাত্রায় আর হবে না, 28 তারিখ চলে চলেছে পরের বার। আর দেরাদুনের ধারে কাছে গেলে এসো।
কোথায়? হ্যাঁ, অবশ্যই অবশ্যই
হ্যাঁ,
অবশ্যই। Machine to learn as nobody is billing on the machine we have person
Right.